Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm the host. And today I'm pleased to have our guest from the Crescent Valley, Chris Brauer. Chris, you're a pretty prolific author. You have 4 books out and a brand new book, which I'm really excited to find out more about. It sounds fascinating. So Lost Between the Stones and the Sea. It sounds like a travel journal that you've put together. I understand it focuses in on Ireland. So can you just tell us a little about the new book?
Yeah, so on the surface, it's about my misadventures in Ireland. And I like traveling, but I'm not very good at traveling. So I get lost on foot, I get lost in cars, and that's really where the misadventures begin, when I wander aimlessly on my own in the fog or up mountains. And so a lot of the book is about that, going outside my comfort zone. I got on the back of a horse for an afternoon. I wouldn't normally do that. I went looking for an elusive dolphin in the bay. I wouldn't normally do that. So it's about misadventures in Ireland.
Okay.
But on a deeper level, it's also about finding a place that I belong, finding a place that feels like home, even if it's not really a culture that's even my own.
So would you describe it as a travel book? Or?
Yeah, it's a travel memoir.
Yeah.
There's history and mythology and culture in there, but it's also interweaves with, my misadventures as well.
Okay, so why Ireland?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, I've been interested in Irish culture for a long time, but I don't have any kind of necessarily any kind of blood relation to Ireland. So I went off to figure out why and wrote a book, and by the end of it, now I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your experience, what you discovered, why it was a special place to you.
So I am attracted to ancient history. Mm-hmm. And the first place that I went to in Ireland is a 5,000-year-old passage tomb called Newgrange. It's the first archaeological site to feature the rising sun of the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. And when you go in there, it's what the Celts call a thin place. It's like where heaven and earth, the line between that border, is the thinnest. And you can really feel like a sense of history, a sense of like the people that came before. And so that just sort of set that momentum with the rest of the trip.
Okay.
2 trips, yeah.
So when you were planning your trip, did you have it pretty well mapped out where you wanted to go, or was this like a random wandering?
Yeah. So the first trip I took with my wife, and she kind of surprised me with tickets to go. So we did the very touristy thing of renting a car and getting bed and breakfast vouchers and driving off around the sort of south half of the country, and did all the touristy things, all the archaeological sites. We went to the Guinness storehouse, all the kind of like typical Irish things that you do. And then the second trip I took on my own, and I plunked myself in a small town in southwestern Ireland, and then just went wherever the wind took me. So I ended up lost all the time. Yeah. And in being lost is when I sort of discovered why I needed to be there.
Right.
Yeah.
So being lost led you to being found.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as you were traveling through Ireland, like, how did you do that physically? Were you did you rent a car? Or were you?
I did rent a car,
yeah.
And of course you're driving on the opposite side of the road to what you're used to.
Yeah.
And the country lanes are very narrow because they weren't built for cars back then. Which probably is why Catholicism remains pretty strong in Ireland, because you have to pray to something when you're driving on those narrow country roads. But yeah, no, it didn't really bother me. But yeah, I rented a car.
So how much of the country did you cover?
On the first trip, I covered as much as I could in a week and a half. And then the second trip, not that much, because I plunked myself in a place called Dingle, which is 2,000 people, 40 pubs. And on the Dingle Peninsula, which is an 80-kilometer stretch, there's 2,000 archaeological sites. So I just randomly went in search of those. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So that would be fascinating. So what's the time frame? When did you do this?
The last trip was 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's taken that long to sort of process all the things that happened. Mm-hmm. It only really was until writing the end of the book that I realized what Ireland has that I needed to find.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something that your readers can look forward to finding out, right?
Right. You know. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to back up just for a moment,
Sure.
Chris, and just talk about your background. I said in the introduction that you're from the Creston Valley, so just tell me how long have you been in the Valley? What do you like about the Creston Valley, and sort of what inspires you as a writer to be in that environment?
Well, I grew up in Victoria, but before that, I was born in New Zealand. My dad was an anthropologist he worked on the Tokelau Islands between New Zealand and Hawaii.
Okay.
So I was essentially born on the road, and so adventure and travel has kind of been a part of who I am.
Right.
Anyway, grew up in Victoria, became a teacher, taught in some sort of obscure places in BC, and then met a woman and ended up in the Creston Valley. And then life didn't quite work out, so we went to the Middle East for a few years and lived there, and now I've been back for about 12 years. So. Okay. Yeah.
And like I mentioned, this new book, Lost Between the Stones and the Sea, is focusing on Ireland, but you had a previous travel a book as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
So the book before this is Frankincense Land.
Right.
And it was mostly about the first year, but I lived with my family for 3 years in the Sultanate of Oman, which is in the sort of the southeast of the Middle East, on the Arabian Peninsula. And at some point, we just decided that life here in BC wasn't working out. So we sold our house and sold our car and gave away a bunch of our belongings and moved to a place that nobody could locate on a map. Yeah. But we found a very sort of safe and welcoming and liberal Middle Eastern country. And it's, today, and it has been for thousands of years, the center of the frankincense trade. And and we had a great time. Yeah.
So that's a little bit different than actually traveling through a place. You're living there in sort of experiencing the day-to-day culture and getting to know the people and on a different level. How is that different than, say, the trip that you would have taken to Ireland?
Yeah, I mean, when you live somewhere, you can really figure out like the real sort of comings and goings of the everyday. And while I would like to spend a year or two in Ireland, it is different when you're on the road. And I tend to, and I'll admit that I did romanticize it a little bit because I'm only there for a short amount of time.
Sure.
So it would be interesting to live there for a longer time, yeah.
Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit more about your Oman experience. So you were there 3 years, is that right?
3 years, yeah.
Okay, so were you teaching school at that point?
Yeah, I taught first-year college students English. Yeah. They need to all take a year of learning English before they can move on to their specialization. And so my students were 18, 19, 20. But it was the first generation that had cars and cell phones.
Sure.
Yeah.
So forgive my ignorance.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know anything about Oman.
Yeah.
Did they have their own language? What language do they speak?
Yeah, they speak Arabic.
Okay.
But it's only been modernized recently, and so there's expat a workforce from all over the place, from India and from the West, and so most places you could get by speaking English. I picked up a little Arabic just to connect with my students. Yeah, I mean, definitely a different language, different dress, different food. But
so the title of the book, The Frankincense Land, refers to their historic bearings and what went on as a culture. Why did you find that so fascinating?
Well, I chose to go to Ireland. Obviously I chose to go to Oman, but I kind of stumbled onto Oman. Yeah.
So it was sort of like a trip of discovery. You were finding out things as you went.
Yeah. I just kind of made it up as I went along. I didn't know the history or culture really before I left, whereas I researched the heck out of going to Ireland.
Right.
So Oman was a constant surprise, and because it was so young, there weren't really guidebooks, and Facebook was just starting out at the time, and so we just wung it basically the whole time. And
so what did you find out about the frankincense trade?
Well, it's been going on for a long time. And in fact, the boswellia tree, which the frankincense comes from, is in danger now because of climate change. But the culture there is very welcoming. I would recommend anybody that's up for an adventure that's not really written about yet.
Right.
Yeah, to go.
So a little bit off the grid, but lots of potential for adventure.
Yeah. We drove across the Arabian desert without really knowing what we were doing. stopped in truck stops without really knowing what we were doing, and yeah.
So is it you said is it a modernized culture? Is it?
It is, yeah. I mean, if we just went there right now, there would be roads and schools and hospitals and cell phones and stuff like that. But yeah, you would definitely notice, the waft of frankincense in the air, and it's a very relaxed place where we lived.
Right.
There's a saying like, "Inshallah, God willing." Right. So you're meeting somebody at 1 o'clock, but maybe 1:30, maybe 2 o'clock. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. Yeah, we think Kootenay life is relaxed, but it's nothing compared to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so those are the 2 books that you've most recently put out, but you've also published 2 other books. Let me see if I get the title right. Life in a Nutshell.
Yeah.
1, and then Volume 2 came out.
Yeah.
A year later?
Less than a year later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Life in a Nutshell.
So when I first wrote Frankincense Land, I pitched it to publishers to see if I could find a publisher, and I got rejection letters up the wazoo. Yeah, travel writing is not huge. So I thought I would jump into the world of self-publishing by publishing kind of journal-type entries of awkward situations that I find myself into, which happens quite often. So anything from teaching to traveling to just being a husband and father. I put out kind of like 50 kind of antidotes of that. But they celebrate kind of the lighter side of life. I've had people say, like, I relate to that story because I've done a silly thing like that before. And so it was meant to make people laugh.
Right.
Yeah.
So a real humorous bent to the approach of your writing. So let's just talk about how you actually do your travel writing or your writing. Do you sit down and just write until it's done, or is it something that you journal with, or what's the process?
I do journal. When I lived in the Middle East, I sent basically emails home saying, "Hey, we're still alive," and those became Frankincense Land. When I was in Ireland, I did journal, but I was always I try to make the most of the time I have, especially if I don't have a lot of time. So I sometimes will journal with pen and paper if I'm sitting in a restaurant on my own. Sometimes I'll type madly on my phone if I'm hiking. And then, the problem with travel memoirs is it can't be just I did this and I did that, because that gets a little bit boring. So you have to somehow interweave humorous little stories of me getting lost, talking to sheep, almost falling off a horse, and with history and mythology, and try to make it the story move along.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some pretty noted writers that sort of focus in on the travel industry. And their experiences. Bill Bryson comes to mind.
Bill Bryson's a classic example.
Would you consider someone like that a mentor? Or?
Yeah. I mean, I like Bill Bryson because it's not necessarily a survival story, right? He's not paddling down the Nile with a loincloth and eating wood gnats. He's just a regular kind of guy observing what he's doing.
Right.
And that's how kind of I travel. I don't have even my mom is a crazier traveler than I. She's crashed in hot air balloons and been lowered in gorilla nests in Rwanda. My traveling is a little bit more calmer than that, but yeah, like Bill Bryson's sense of humor, the way he interweaves story and history together. Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm aiming for.
Yeah. When I first encountered your books, that's sort of what struck me, is that there might be a similarity there, and that it was your personal experience peppered with some humorous antidotes as well. So, good for you. So just tell me, when you actually get to the publishing process, how did that all go together?
Well, like I said, I did try the traditional method. Yeah. I mean, I just thought at some point, like, how many years am I going to get rejection letters? So I kind of delved into the world of self-publishing, which is a whole different thing, because you have to be responsible for everything. Right. So when I put out Life in a Nutshell, I thought, maybe some friends and family will buy a copy, and since then, it's done weirdly well. Yeah, hundreds of copies.
You sound so surprised.
Yeah. So it was just meant as kind of like, I don't know, like a dipping my toe into the world of self-publishing, and it worked out really well. So I just kept going. Right.
So all your books are self-published?
All my books are self-published, yeah.
So how do you distribute them? How do you get them out to the public? And follow-up question to that is, what's your reaction? So first of all, how do you get it out?
Well, I have a pretty good online presence. On on Facebook and on Instagram, and so I'm selling them that, by pitching in that way. And they're on sort of the megalithic monstrosity that is Amazon. It's been difficult sort of getting, it out physically beyond my own town. But Creston's very supportive in what I do. There was a point where I was the editor for the newspaper, and so my name's been out there for a while.
Okay.
I mean, who's to know what the publishing world looks like going forward? I'm happy with how things are going. People have reacted well to the books.
Yeah. So what would be a typical reaction to? I mean, your books are a little bit different in that the first few are more humorous and not so much a travel. So do you really look for different audiences, or sort of similar audiences?
Yeah, I mean, with the travel, like I like reading a lot of travel writing because I like to travel. I think there's a lot of people that are interested. When I mentioned that it's an Ireland book, people perk up quite a bit. I think that there's sort of an element of sort of finding yourself that people are attracted to. I've had people on social media send me photos of like the book next to other books that they're like doing research at the same time as they're reading mine, which is kind of fun, or mapping out my route on a map.
Right.
I mentioned like the Neolithic stones, and so people are like researching the stones as they're reading my books. So that's pretty fun to have people interact with them. Yeah.
So could someone take your book and actually sort of follow in your footsteps and do the same? Same trip?
Yeah.
Do you know of anybody that's done that?
I know people have pulled out maps and have like followed. I don't know if people have like actually like, there's a famous travel memoir called "As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning," about an Englishman in the 30s that walks across Spain. And a few years ago, an Englishman, Alistair Humphreys, did the same thing and followed the same, walking across Spain, trying to play the fiddle for loose change. Yeah, I mean, I didn't do anything super crazy like that. People can easily travel the same route that I did. Yeah.
So you're a teacher. What grades do you teach?
I teach grade 4 or 5 down at Yakanuki School.
Okay.
And my students, I mean, I like laughing with them.
Right.
And I also like laughing at them.
So do you share your stories, your books with your students as well?
Some of it. They're in the Life in the Nutshell book, some of them, but I've changed their names so they don't automatically recognize who they are. But yeah, I'm a teacher that, how do I put this? I get bored easily, so I do things to my students that aren't, anyway.
Sounds like you give them challenging assignments.
Yeah, challenging assignments. How to use like a 3-man slingshot without hurting themselves, or like eating spicy chips with, I play tricks on my students all the time, and then those stories end up in the book.
Right. So you've got a built-in reservoir of stories here. Okay, so what's to you, what's the importance of telling these stories? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to document it? What does it do for you personally?
I'd like readers to go on adventures, even if it's micro adventures. The Norwegians have a concept called the doorstep mile, in which that's the hardest part of the journey, is like the mile from your front door. And it's too easy these days to stay inside. So even if it's just walking amongst the trees for 20 minutes, if that is more than you would normally do, I'd like to encourage that. Or if it's going for a walk, in the forest for a day when you normally wouldn't do that, that could be an adventure for somebody. It doesn't have to be wandering off by yourself in Ireland. Right. I'd like to encourage readers to go and find the magic and mystery of the everyday beyond the screen, beyond the limitations of house and work.
And I think that's a great suggestion, because I think all of us miss or discount, the beauty of our own backyard. And when we have an opportunity to discover that and go out and just find what is there so close at hand, it sort of enriches who we are. Yeah,
I mean, at the very tail end of this book, I basically say, like, the magic that I found in Ireland helped me find the magic in the everyday here back in BC. And so I spend a lot of time on my own wandering through kind of the interior wetlands that are near Creston. And last summer I did a 5-day solo hike on the Vancouver Island. This year I'm planning on doing an 8-day solo hike on Vancouver Island, and just finding the magic there as well.
Is that the West Coast Trail, or?
No, it's the North Coast Trail.
Oh, okay.
Apparently it's more difficult than the West Coast Trail.
Okay. So where would you go on that particular trek?
So I'm if all goes well, I'm hiring a boat to take me to the front of the trail by Cape Scott. And then if all goes well and I don't get eaten by bears, then 8 days later I pop out the other end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that may be sort of the basis of book 5, if I can interweave that with what's going on in my life these days. And
Okay, so again, going back to the the concept we talked about earlier, when you're doing travel writing, it's not just I went here, I went there, I went there. You're looking for history, you're looking for stories. How important is it that you share sort of the culture or the things that are unique to each area in your stories?
I mean, I took my minor in history, but I didn't really find it that interesting taking courses and writing essays and doing tests in university. I find history interesting when you stumble upon it. And so when I present bits of history in the book, it's because I'm at the point where I've stumbled upon something interesting, not like here is 20 pages of random dry dates and names. So I think that history can come alive if you do it right, and I think often we don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that myself. I write historical novels, and that just putting the life of the people or the characters into the story often sort of gives you a whole new perspective as to what was going on in the history. So instead of just dry history, you're really telling a story, and that's what it's about, right? Storytelling.
Right.
Yeah. So as you work through the process and you start thinking about a new book, so let's just talk about the planning for your Vancouver Island book. How does that all sort of go together? Is it sort of something that just happens because you're going on the adventure, or are you thoroughly researching this and sort of know what to expect?
Well, it's just an idea right now. But lately I've kind of tapped into more of like getting of who I am, in my mid-40s now, and in sort of reconnecting with nature, reconnecting with people, and sort of finding with the next chapter of my life. And I think...
So I get the impression that people are really important to you.
Yeah, these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say in my 30s I was a different kind of person.
Right.
Yeah. And through my wandering and through my travels, I've connected more with people.
Right. So you've done Oman, you've done Ireland, you've are looking at Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
So when's the book about the Kootenays?
Yeah, I think that will be interwoven. Yeah. Lately there's been sort of changes in my life, and my kids are grown, and my wife and I are no longer together, and I'm with somebody new, and so all of that sort of life experience will sort of get interwoven as I'm hiking and surviving in the Vancouver Island wilderness.
Okay.
Yeah.
So good time to digest everything, right?
Good time to digest everything. Yeah. I think that's what solo adventuring is about.
Right.
When you travel with somebody, you have a crux. You have somebody to talk with. When you travel by yourself, it's just you.
Right.
And so that can be hard and great at the same time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So, just tell me about your physical setting when you write. Do you have a studio that you sit down in, or do you have a favorite place, or is it something that you've already described, journaling and so forth? But do you have a formal place that you sit down and write in?
I do. A few years ago, I found an antique roll-top desk. So I usually sit there and write. I have an elderly cat who often joins me. If I'm typing on a laptop, she'll sleep on top of the laptop, so then I have to use the laptop as a decoy so that I can journal in my book. At one point I had 2 laptops so that she would sleep on one laptop and I could work on the other.
Very generous.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. But sometimes I'll like strong black coffee in the morning, or you know, put on some music. There is a routine I have for sure. And sometimes I give myself like daily goals, especially if it's a break, if it's spring break or summer, so I'm not teaching. You know, 2,000 or 3,000 words or whatever it is, 5,000 words, and sometimes it feels like work.
Sure.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that your books have got thicker.
They have, yes.
Is that on purpose?
I mean,
or?
not necessarily. They're as thick as that it needs to be to tell the story. But yeah.
Okay. So how do you know when you're finished the story?
I don't know. You just do. Yeah. So I think as I was writing, I thought, well, that's a pretty good conclusion, and maybe I just need to stop there.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you have any experience working with other writers or writing groups or anything like that you feel that have maybe helped you or inspired you, or are you basically a solo act?
Solo act. I have been part of a writers group in Creston. I did go to a couple of writers festivals in Salmon Arm. I've done online courses, so I've put in the work that way. I've tried to sort of hone my craft as I go. I think when you think of it as like a hobby that you really want to get better at, you find places to do that.
And is that a continuing process? Are you always looking for ways to sort of improve the craft?
Yeah, and I pick away at poetry, and that's a whole different thing on its own as well.
Okay. Have you published any of it?
Not like my own collection, but yeah, like in journals and magazines and things like that. So that's also up for like project number 5 as well.
So can I just delve into that a little bit? What's the difference between writing travel books and writing poetry?
Yeah, poetry to me has to show up, whereas I can beat travel memoir. I can kind of like lure it along. If I lure along poetry, it doesn't work. Yeah, so that whole thing about, there's magic in the air and it comes down on you and you have to, I find that that's the poetry genre, which is annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you just never quite know when it'll show up.
No, you don't know. Yeah, I could show up in the middle of a run and I have to stop and like write it in my phone and like stop the timer if I'm timing my run, and it's not great.
Right. Well, great. Hey, Chris, it's been a joy to have you as a guest and just talk about your books and just focus in on the fact that that you sort of bring these sort of unknown destinations to life and allow your readers to sort of experience what you've experienced. Thank you for doing that, and we look forward to your future projects as well. So keep us posted when you get those done as well.
Sure. All right. Thanks for having me, Keith.
Yeah. So it's been Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. Our guest today is Chris Brauer. His latest book is Lost Between the Stones and the Sea, a journal of discovery in Ireland. So thank you, Chris. We appreciate you being a guest.